Managing Linux users and groups. Today, this is going to be our topic. We will discuss about users, groups, and how a user can switch to another user, and what are the different properties or the groups that are related to a user and also of a group. First, user. Who is a user? As the description says, it can be people or this can be accounts that exist for a specific application to use. And these accounts normally exist in etc passwd file. Okay, that's the place where the location of all the local users is stored, and id is the command that displays the basic properties of a logged in user. So I am logged in as a root user, so when I execute id command, that would give me the uid that is linked to my user, and also gid that is related to my group, and also multiple groups I am part of, or maybe the root, whoever it is. And if you want to know who actually owns a file or a directory, ls-l is the command that is used, and that would display the list of files and directories. Along with it, if you find the third and fourth column is referred to user owner and group owner. So here we see that the user owner and group owner are both of them are same. And another thing is that you could use a command called psau, which would give me the processes which are being run as a separate user. So currently I see the processes are running as user root, but it does not mean that these are the only processes running in the system, because I see now 3 of them listed, which basically means that this particular terminal where I am logged in has only 3 processes running. However, when I execute a command called ps-ef, will give me the lot of processes, so multiple processes which are running on my Linux system. So it gives me a lot of details which we will discuss in another section with regard to the processes and the services. So for now, we just need to remember that a process is a task which is being carried out behind of a service or particular activity. So that's all we wanted to know about a process for now. And a user, when he is created, the information about that user will be stored in a file as we were talking about. So the file name is etc passwd. So when I look at that file, it gives me a list of users who are created in the system, and these are all called local users for Linux system. So when I say local users, they are not the active directory users which are related to Windows AD or Linux AD when we configure it as a system, but these are all local users for the Linux system. And now there are different fields separated by colon. If you look at the file, what does they mean, or what do they basically mean? So let me grep only for one user which I have recently created on my system, which is ARK. So if you look at different fields, it gives me multiple columns. So the first column is the username. It could be any name that you wanted to give, and this could be normally in a real-time environment. It is the first letter of the last name and the first name is given normally, but it is not the standard format that everyone has to follow. It depends or differs from company to company. And the second field refers to the password field, which is not displayed here for a security reason, because the password is stored in another file which is a etc shadow, which we will discuss it a bit later now. this is a file. Sure. And the third column is referred to the user ID, and the fourth one is a group ID. So every user in Linux system has a unique number which is referred to as a user ID. Okay, and the system understands, or any task that is carried out by a user is understood by the system with the UID. And GID, yes, and it is related to the group that we will discuss it shortly. And also the fifth column that we look at is also known as JCOS, or it can also be termed as comment, because this is a place where you wanted to give some meaningful information of the username that is being given here. Maybe I was saying, ARC is the user ID that I have created, and I wanted to make it very clear that the user ID belongs to Aravind Krishna. So it is just the name. It could be any other name. If you look at any other username from etc shadow, there should be some information. etc passwd, it should give me some meaningful information about that user. So it is written for an FTP user, it is written as a FTP user. So it is a meaningful information that is given. And the next field refers to the home directory, which is a default home directory of that user. So for a regular user, whoever the user is created by a root user would have the /home as the home directory, and along with their username there. And the last field, which is a shell field, where the default shell is defined. We have multiple shells. If you want to look at the shells that are part of your system, you could use etc shells file, which would list you the multiple shell files there. So bin bash is the default shell that is given to a particular user, whoever is created by a root, or whoever has the privilege to create a user. So the shell is basically used to execute multiple commands to carry out few tasks in Linux system. So that's about etc passwd file. And when we get to a group, what is a group? So when we speak about users, when there are multiple users, we wanted to group them together for or to give them multiple permissions at one place, or maybe you wanted to give one set of permissions to multiple users. So the easy way to do that is to put all these users in a group and give a single set of permissions to a group, so that the management becomes more easier and it enhances the administration. So group is, by definition, it is known as a logical expressions of an organization, which is a combination of users. So a group can contain one or more users, and groups is the command. When you execute it, it would give me the number of users I am part of. Okay, so I am currently, which when I say I am logged in as root. So when I execute a command called groups, it gives me the names of the groups I am part of. Currently root is part of root group, so it prints me that. For example, if I switch to, if I switch to a user called ARC, when I execute a command called groups, it gives me the list of groups I am part of. I am part of ARK and wheel groups. Okay, so I'm coming out of that user. I am logged in as root again back. Now etc group is the place where the group names are stored. Just like we have etc passwd for usernames, we also have etc group as the default file for the groups. Every user created in Linux has a default group with their name itself in etc group. For example, we were talking about FTP earlier, who was part of etc passwd, which means he is a local user. He would also have the entry with the same name in group itself, which basically means that whenever a user is created, a group with the same name will be the primary group of that user. For example, ID FTP. So if you want to know the basic properties of another user, you would execute the command in the following manner: ID space and the username you wanted to check for. and this is where it gives me that FTP is part of FTP group. So FTP name itself is the default. This is known as the primary group. Okay, primary group of this user. Now, when you look at the file where the groups are stored, this has multiple options. What are the options that are part of etc group? Okay, now one is the first column refers to the name of the group or a group name. So, and the next one, if you are setting a password for the group, and that is stored in a file called etc gshadow. Just like we have users passwords stored in etc shadow, for the passwords of a group are stored under etc gshadow, that you would like to make a note of. And the third column refers to the GID of that group. Okay, slocate postdrop has 90 GID, and different groups have their own GIDs. And the last column refers to the list of users that you wanted to specify. So I don't see any users here except for the mail. It has the postfix as the extra user. So you could find out if any other employee or if any other user is part of that group using etc group file, or you could execute a command called groups that gives you the list of groups a user is part of. Now, how do you switch between a user to another user? How do you change between users to from user to another user? How do you do that? Or basically, how will you be able to execute commands as another user? So I am logged in as a root. For example, I am switching to another user called ARK. So if you want to change to another user, the command that we use is su. Okay, su is the switch user. Switch user is the command that we use to change to another user and execute command just like him. But a simple catch is that if you execute a command like su hyphen and the username for any regular user, okay, for any regular user, if he has to switch to another user, he has to know that user's password. Okay, and but for root, being the super user of all these things in the system, he does not need a password. So when I execute a command similar to this su-ark, it does not prompt me for a password. However, when I switch to a root user, if a regular user wants to switch to a root user, he could either use su or su hyphen. Anything would work, but it prompts me for a password. When I enter a password, it takes me to root user login. So for a regular user, he needs to have permissions to switch to another user, but for root user, it does not require. And basically, if someone wants to execute permissions or execute something like any other user or maybe as a root user, because sometimes a company or an organization consists of multiple programs or multiple projects where people have to execute multiple commands which might require root privileges. So instead of waiting for a root user to come in and execute a few commands, and it would consume a lot of time, and that is where the user has to be more diligent enough and has to get necessary approvals to have his account privileges elevated, which basically means that he needs to have a temporary or maybe a permanent access to execute command just like root, or maybe few commands just like root, and the directives or the properties or the options to have that is defined under a file called etc sudoers. This is where the options are specified for a user to become a root or maybe to execute different commands. If you want to execute or if you want to change the details here, you could go through this particular parameters, and that will give you a lot of other options where a person can execute the commands like any other user. if you look at the root user as all the permissions across all the systems and at all terminals basically, so he has total permissions. For example, if I want to set it, maybe something like arc user wants to have all permissions, I could set it this way: arc all, maybe something like all. Yes, this gives me full permissions on the system just like root. However, it is not so easy to have that access. It has to go through prior approvals from the application owners or Linux administrators to gain that access. And also there are few other opportunities or few other parameters where you can execute only few commands, but that you will have to go through or dig into more of the sudoverse file, where it gives you command alias option, where a particular a set of users who are part of services group will be able to execute only these commands which are given here. So it is more flexible and it has a lot of other options where a person can execute multiple other commands like any other user if he is specified in sudoverse file. Now we have been talking about adding a user and removing a user, or maybe multiple other commands. How a user is basically added. To add a user, the most basic command is user add, and if you want to know most of the options which are related to user add, you could use a command called user add -help. So this will give you a user add and the options that we need to use. The most basic command that we can use in user add is the user add and the name of the person you would like to create. User add, maybe I would like to say Vijay. Vijay is the user I have created now, and ID Vijay will give me the properties of Vijay user. Now here the UID, GID groups, everything is decided or defined by system itself, because I have not specified any particular option which is given over here. But if you want to specify your own details, or maybe if you want to enhance the creation of a user, you could use the multiple options provided here. Because whenever a user is created, what happens when a user is created, basically the entry in the etc passwd is given, and also entry in the group file is given. Also he will have a default home directory, and after that he will also have the primary group created for him, so which is similar to the group that is given here. And so if you want to know, basically maybe if he will also have a shell created, or comment geckos that we were talking on top here. So all these things will be created by default, because without your intervention when you execute a command, user add. But if you want to choose your customized behavior for a user, you would need to use options. User add, for example, maybe I would like to have 2000 as the user ID for a user called Vijay1, for example. So if I look at it, Vijay1 will have 2000 as the user ID if you look at it, because the behavior is decided by me here, not by the system. I chose the user ID, and I could also decide a GID here. If you look at, there are multiple other groups. Okay, and to create a group, to create a group we can use a command called group add. Without any arguments and without any options, it is the system decides what are the basic parameters that a group needs to have. Maybe I would like to create a group called finance, for example. Okay, and here since it is a group, the group entry is by default created in the etc group. So I would grep for that etc group, and this gives me that the group is created under etc group. Good enough so far. And if you want to add few users to a group, there are two ways that you can do. One is from directly executing a command, which is user mod, which basically means that I am trying to modify users parameters. And here I could mention -g, which basically is referred to groups. So since it is a user mod command, I could also use user mod -help to find out the recent or maybe the frequently used options. Though if you want to get to know more options, man pages are always there. And so user mod -g, and you will need to give the group name that you would like to add a user to. And I would like to add ARC user or maybe Vijay user to finance group. I could use it this way. So when I check Vijay now, ID Vijay, this should give me user is part of finance group. So here Vijay becomes the primary group and finance becomes the supplementary group, right? And similarly, you could also directly vim the etc group file and go to the bottom of the file where it is listed as finance, and I could easily add Vijay1 as the part of finance group, right? So ID Vijay1 should list me the finance group now. There you go, you have it. And the catch here is that whenever I use -g, this normally replaces the immediate supplementary group, which is a finance here in this case. So if I'm trying to add another group, maybe a Red Hat is the group that I have added, and I am trying to add the same or maybe trying to execute the same command with a Red Hat group, Vijay. Great. Look at the difference now. So previously finance is the first supplementary group that was added to Vijay, and secondly when I executed the same command, finance or a finance group is replaced by a Red Hat group. But in a real-time environment or in any case, a user can be part of or wants to be at least part of multiple groups. So the behavior like this would not be accepted if a group is replaced with another group. Hence there is an option to add or to append groups to a user is A, which basically means append. So if you look at the options here, this gives me the summary of what the command does: append the user to the supplemental groups. So I could add user Vijay to finance group now. So because Vijay is already part of Red Hat group and I am trying to append finance group to Vijay's group list. There you go, he is part of two groups now. Good enough. And similarly, you could also use a command called group mod to modify the group parameters. -help will give you again few simple options. Okay, the basic things that you can use is to change the GID of a group, similarly a GID -g, and also you could change the group name from an old name to a new name. You could use -n, and if there is a password that you are trying to set, you could use -p. So that is one of the options or few of the options that you can always use. The next important thing that we would deal with is the passwords. So far we have seen how a user can be created, But we would like to know how a password can be set for a user. So passwd is the command that you can use to set a password for a user. Now, by default, you could mention the syntax as passwd, and the username will, or user ID will change the password of that given user. Or if you are giving without this username, if you do not mention the username, it tries to change the root's password. Hence, we need to be very careful when changing the password. And mostly, the root can change anyone's password without knowing their old password. However, the user cannot change others' password or their own password without knowing old password. Okay. And now we have already seen that whenever there is a password that is changed, it shows or changes the password in a file called etc shadow on top. Okay. So we will try to change a password for Vijay. And Vijay, I will provide it as Red Hat 123 or @123. Red Hat @123. Oh, sorry, I mistyped the passwords. Oh, this still doesn't take it. Let me check. Oh, that's good. So, okay. Now I want you to concentrate on the error that it is, showing me on the screen. Bad password. So, whenever a root user is trying to change the password of any user or of root itself, he can give any password which does not need to meet the password policy. When I say password policy, we must have seen a lot of policies when we were creating a password for our bank accounts or maybe email accounts, etc. So that tells me that I would need to have one uppercase or maybe few lower cases, one special character, etc., one number. So that is what a password policy means. Here, root, the password policy does not apply to root. However, for a regular user, all the password policies apply. So whenever a regular user is trying to change his own password or someone else's password, he has to follow that protocol, password policy protocol. Only then the user will be able to change, or regular user will be able to change someone else's or his own password. Now, when you look at the password file, which is a etc shadow file, I'm trying to grep for Vijay, for whom we have recently changed the password for. So when I look at it, look at the long password that is set here. The entire thing that you look at from the first column until the second column, this is the encrypted password. Now this has three parts divided by dollar symbol. So this is the first part, $6, and then the next one is dollar, from the second dollar to the third dollar, and the last part is from the third dollar till the end of the password. So basically what these three are, the first one is referred to hashing algorithm. Hashing algorithm is made up of multiple calculations which we may not really understand it for now because it is defined by hashing or security systems. So we completely have three types of hashing algorithms, which are MD5, SHA-256 and SHA-512. 512 being the most secured hash algorithm, and the second one is related to the salt, which we will see now, and the third one is a encrypted password of the created user or added user. Now when a user logs in, what actually happens in the background? See, When a user tries to log into a system using his password, the password is taken, which is an unencrypted password. Because when you enter a password, something like, for example, maybe I'm trying to enter a password called Red Hat 123. This is my clear text format, which is not encrypted, which is not secured. So what happens when a user enters this password? This gets combined, or this gets added with salt that we have seen so far on the second column, or a second section of the password field. Okay, this is salt. So when this is mixed, or when this is put together, this is being encrypted within a hashing algorithm which is already present there, be it a 256 or 512. So when you look at the numbers here it is mentioned as 6, which basically means that it is a 512 SHA 512 algorithm. For SHA 256 it would be 5, and for MD5 it is 1. Right now, salt mixes with the unencrypted password and along with the hashing algorithm which is present, and creates an encrypted password. And if this encrypted password matches the entry in the password file, or a shadow file that we have been talking about, so if this is matching this entry here, then the user allowed it, else the user would not be allowed it. And now what is the salt that we have been missing so far, or maybe we didn't have clear idea? This is used when different people have the same password. Maybe excuse me. Okay, so when different people have the same password, for example, Red Hat 123, Vijay has Red Hat 123 as his password, and Vijay 1 also has the same password, and it is a salt which makes a difference between two passwords. So that is the reason we have salt being part of the password as well. And these two are encrypted using hashing algorithm. When after the encryption, if this encryption is matching the encryption which is already present in the shadow file, that is when the user is allowed. And the user, whoever is created, will have a minimum number of days for his password by default, and maximum number of days for his password. So to check the parameters or properties of a user's password, we would use a command called chage-l and the user's name, for example. So I would write that command down here if you want to know. chage-l Vijay, for example, or maybe I would generalize the term, say username. Great. Now, if you look at the numbers or the properties, or the number of days, etc., whichever the parameters that are given matches exactly the details or the entries that are provided in the pass or shadow file here. If you look at the password that was last changed of Vijay was on December 5th, that was today, and password expires never, and inactive never, expires never. So basically the account will never expire, that is what is being said. And maximum number of days between a password change, 0, basically means that the password does not need to be changed. And the maximum number of days, 999, which is unlimited. So the 7 days are the minimum number of days before the before the password could expire. Before the 7 days, the system tries to intimate you that the password needs to be changed. However, in this case, this is not applicable because the password would never expire here. And if you want to change those default behavior, you can use a command called chage-help to find out what are the options, or more options can be found under man page. For example, if you want to set an expiry date, okay, expiry date of an account, for example, here account expiration date is set to never. So I would set it to something like maybe tomorrow. Okay, let's try that. Ch age -e, and here there should be a particular format that needs to be followed to set a date. And if you are not sure which format that you will need to follow, get to a man page that should clearly give you what you would need to do, or what is the format that you would need to give. Okay, here is the E option that is given, and the format is this: year, month and date. Okay, so ch age -e as specified in the options here. Okay, and I will have to mention some date, 2017, and next it's supposed to be, or maybe I would mention 2018. Let's say for example 12th month 25th. Okay, December 25th of 2018, whose account has to expire? It is Vijay's. And so let's go back to check the properties of Vijay user, and it should give me that the account expires on December 25th of 2018. Okay, so you could use multiple other options, okay, minimum days and maximum days, etc., and the calculation goes something like this. Maximum days can be calculated as the minimum number of days plus warning days. We have been talking about minimum number of days here, minimum number of days which is set to 0, but you can set it to any number of days here, and that plus, and also the warning days. Warning days are set as 7. So if you have some 100 days here for the minimum number of days, 100 days plus 7 is 107 days, is equal to the maximum number of days for a password. And then if even the maximum number of days have expired, or maybe the user hasn't changed his or her password even after the maximum number of days have reached, and that is when the account expires. Okay, account expires after the maximum number of days. And then even after the password has expired and still the user hasn't changed, the account gets into an inactive mode, and that is when the account gets inactive, where the user has to get back to Linux admin or a system administrator to change his or her password. So today we have all spoken about managing local Linux users and group. What is a user, who is a user, what is a group, and how do you create a user, how to modify user, how to create a group, and how do you modify a group, and the password policies that needs to be followed, and how do you manage, or how do you administer the password policy or password parameters of a user or a group. Okay, that's all for now. Let's come back with another topic tomorrow. Thank you.